Welcome in, everyone. I am sitting here with Dr. Greer Kirschenbaum, and I'm so excited to have her on this channel. I stumbled upon her work when I was in my postpartum haze, I think on Instagram probably, purchased her book, The Nurture Revolution, immediately and on audiobook so I could listen to it, and resonated so deeply with her science-backed offering of how to nurture and care for infants. It just resonated with what I was feeling intuitively. So today we're going to get into some delicious brain science and also talk about the power of nurturing both infants and ourselves. I think this conversation will be relevant not just to parents, new parents, but to everybody with a nervous system, because we all have nervous systems that respond to love. So it can be a profound way to reflect on the development of each of our nervous systems and how we respond to stress today based off of that nurturing. So welcome in, Greer. I'm so excited to have you here.
Well, thank you so much. I loved everything you just said. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes. So you've spent over, in your bio, it said 15 years in neuroscience labs, and now you're working closely with families. You're a neuroscientist, you're a doula, and you're a mother yourself. And I'm curious what inspired this shift to work with families and what lights you up about this work.
It was a big shift to go from working in a lab in a small team, often alone, to a practice of working with families, which I've been doing for the past 10 years or so. It's interesting. I think that the motivation and the reasons that I'm doing this work have kind of been revealing themselves to me over time in so many different ways. I think the first motivation was all of that time in the lab. I was really focused on trying to improve mental health and looking at early life experience in humans 0 to 3 years as this incredible time where so much of our mental health is formed. And I kind of got this idea of how powerful would that be if we could teach people about this, if all moms and dads and parents could know this incredible brain development is happening in these years and the experiences babies have matter so, so, so much. And so I was really motivated from that science that I'd been just observing over those 15 years. I was always keeping my eye on it. Over the time I was there, all of the foundational studies kind of came out really, really, underlining this. We've kind of known about attachment science and a lot of the psychological parts of why early life experience matters for a very long time, like I'd say since the 50s probably, when John Bowlby, Mary Ainsworth did a lot of their attachment research work, but the neuroscience had come out throughout my career, and I just had a folder on my computer, just like another one, another one, another one. And then I just, by the end of my time in the lab, I was ready to have my own baby, start my own family, and it just felt like the right time to come out. Yeah, that was like the beginning, but there's more. I have like my personal story kind of has been revealed to me as well. Yeah.
So your personal story of maybe memories you might have from your infancy or childhood. I asked that, I mean, that's a very personal question.
Yeah.
But I know for me, becoming a new mother, I was amazed with the somatic inside out experience that I had. It was like a visceral memory of being a baby. I don't know how else to explain it. In my nervous system, it wasn't that it was cognitive. It was that my body was remembering things, and that's still being revealed to me. My little guy's 2 years old. He turns 2 in 4 days, actually. So I'm still in it in a lot. I
Yeah.
mean, we always are, but I'm in the early developmental stage right now as we speak.
Yeah. Did you find that you saw, like, I found with my son, I would just I would just be like loving him in like the perfect way. And he'd just be like so supported and cared for at these certain moments that it would just explode with like joy and awe and, exhilaration through me. Like I was like, oh my gosh, this baby is just getting this most beautiful experience. Did you experience that? Is that what you're talking about?
Felt like heaven on earth for me
Yeah.
at certain times. That's the best way I can describe it, is that these highs and these moments of almost timelessness, it's heart expanding. That's
Yeah.
the best way I can put it, because there's also, for me, there was a lot of challenge in it where I was remembered of times where maybe I wasn't cared for. I have, you know, an amazing mother. I was raised really well, but there's still memories that I had where I maybe wasn't picked up when I was crying. And that sounds maybe this to someone who hasn't been in it really minor, but it felt really big for me becoming a mother. And then there's this profound opportunity to rebathe those moments in nurturing, which is the heart of what we're going to get to today. And I want to start the conversation with this framework of what the stress response is just in adults. What are the key players in our brain and our body for stress? So we can lay that foundation and then have a conversation from that place.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I love how you kind of said in the beginning, this work is so important. I mean, so important for parents, but also for all people because we've all been a baby. We've all gone through this developmental process. So it's really interesting for people who are doing work, self work, and looking at themselves and things like that. So, yeah, our stress system is primarily constructed from 0 to 3 years. And the way it works in an adult is first, our body detects a threat. So, this is largely processed in our brain area called the amygdala. And our amygdala can be primed to be very sensitive to sort of be detecting a lot of threats, generalized threats, and that can be in the way that we interpret facial expressions in other people, the way we interpret noises and other sensory experiences, so social, sensory, and all kinds of worries and internal kind of thoughts as well can be threats. And so if we're highly nurtured as a baby, that part of our brain will, I would say, be responding to threats in an adaptive way to really sort of tell us what is to me, in any domain. Right. And if we experience lower nurture as a baby, that amygdala can be primed to be very reactive. And so someone might spend a lot of time experiencing threats and a lot of time in a stress kind of mode in their brain and body. So our amygdala is the first part of our stress response. It sort of says like, pay attention. Something's either going out on in the world that's threatening, or there's a thought or idea in my mind that is going to be threatening to me and my existence. And the next part of our stress system is called the hypothalamus, which will release stress into our brain and body. That part of the brain is also affected by how much we're nurtured, the development, and kind of affects how much load of stress goes into our brain and body to respond to that threat. So then that's kind of the HPA axis. So it's a hypothalamus, signals to our pituitary gland, to our adrenal glands, and that's where cortisol is released into our body. Our brains also release adrenaline and other types of stress or neurohormones that will be alerting to us. Our body goes through a response as well. So when we're under stress, everything's affected from head to toe. And this is why stress is so vital for mental and physical health. So in a stress response, we can start at our head. Our thoughts get really narrow and focused. We can ruminate, these kinds of things. Our vision is affected. So we actually will see tunnel vision. We'll only see what's right in front of us and not have a wide vista perspective in the world with peripheral vision and things like that. Our heartbeat's affected. So a lot of our blood flow gets directed to our arms and legs because we might need to fight or flight or freeze to get away from that stressor. And that's very harmful to our organs because blood flow is directed away from our organs into our extremities. You can imagine if you spend too much time that way, it's going to wear down your body significantly if your organs aren't getting healthy blood flow. Your heart rate's affected, your breathing's affected, your immune system is affected. It can be hypo or hyperactive depending on the history. Your aging accelerates. There's telomeres, which are little proteins that protect our DNA, and those can, under stress, will get raveled away faster. So we age faster. Our sleep can be affected, right? All of these things, because stress was meant to be an acute experience. It's meant to get us away from a threat and then be over, right? Under adaptive circumstances. So then that stress is all there. Our body and brain have their reaction. And then the last part is to stop. And so we have receptors, we have them like somewhat along the way of the HP axis, but also very much so in the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. These areas are also growing in response to nurture in early life, and they're responsible for shutting off the stress. And so we can have higher or lower efficiency of turning our stress off, which we would want to when the time is right to do so. So that's what we can do as adults. And so, in our hypothalamus, a lot of that stopping the stress switch is physiological. It's like, stress hormones attaching to off switches in our hippocampus that can shut it off, as well as our prefrontal cortex has these off switches. But as mature adults, we can also be using our prefrontal cortex we can use our mind to change our body. So we can say, oh, I'm aware I'm stressed right now. I'm going to move in a certain way. I'm going to breathe in a certain way. I'm going to tap or go for a walk or call a friend or something, right? We can do extra things to kind of communicate with our stress system.
Such a good summary. For everyone tuning in, kind of think about where these are in your own body. So, as in general, the prefrontal cortex is right behind the forehead. And then the more survival stress response would be at the base of the skull, right where the neck meets the skull. And the adrenals are kind of in the lower back area, in that mid, like upper lower back area, if you reach your hands behind. And the reason I think this is so important is because our body made this response. And so, as we're kind of learning, tracking it in our own system can help us apply it in real life.
Yeah,
And
visualizing is so helpful.
so helpful. So, you gave this wonderful framework around the stress response and how we can cope with stress as adults. Let's talk about the developing infant brain. You had some incredible stats in your book about an infant brain wiring a million connections a second. Like,
Yeah,
that's even like hard to comprehend that.
it is.
And that by age 3, I think you said the brain is at 80% of adult size. So this 0 to 3 mark is very critical for wiring of the stress response and wiring of many parts of the brain. Is there anything that you want to speak to about the infant brain?
Yeah, I think the first thing to know is what the infant brain is bathed in during these years 0 to 3. I like to think of the baby's brain like floating in a bath, and we can add different ingredients to this bath. And if we add, if the baby's mostly nurtured, supported, responded to, especially with stress, we're going to be adding oxytocin, dopamine, endorphins, this very specific cocktail in this bath that will then determine what genes are turned on and off in the baby's brain, how their brains connect, how their brains grow, especially in the stress system and other systems that support mental and physical health for life. Very important. And then the opposite is we can incubate this bath in stress hormones and, cortisol, adrenaline, the other kind of cocktails, sort of stress cocktail that we could create. And if we can do everything we can to have that baby's brain bathing in oxytocin and that cascade the majority of the time as much as possible, but especially when we're together with our baby, we're going to be setting them up to reach all of their potential in life, right? To be the healthiest they can be, to be the most social, engaged, all the things we wish for our little ones. Of course, they're going to enter stress, and we'll talk about that, but they need support to control it. But the way that we're currently parenting babies, for the most part, the way that mainstream society does, is putting them in that stress bath like as much as possible. We're limiting everything that brain needs to be in the oxytocin safe, beautiful growth bath. And so that's the revolution I'm hoping for, right? So we can switch the kind of ingredients of the brain is floating in early life, because it has really, really important effects. So we'll talk about the stress system because that's the most well-known effects that we have. So in the stress system, babies have their alarm system working. They have that amygdala working. They can detect threats. It is also important to know that they don't have the same ones as us as adults. So a lot of people are like, they're fed, they're changed, like they're dry, they're safe in a house, there's no threats. Like they just let them cry. There's no threats. They're fine, right? But that has, really lacks a total understanding of what a baby finds threatening and what babies need. Being alone is very threatening and terrifying for a baby, to the point where they, extreme terror for many babies to be alone. Really threatening. They don't know that we have locks on the doors, maybe an alarm system. For them, they're like the most vulnerable little baby who can't even move themselves or even maybe control their arms and legs or feed themselves or do anything for themselves. Essentially like they've been abandoned in the wild, right? They think they're in a cave where a wolf or, anything could be coming for them, right? So babies have very different threats. So of course, being hungry, thirsty, or cold is a threat, but their needs for proximity, closeness, touch, they're just as important as their needs for air, feeding, all that kind of stuff. So they detect threats, all those basic need ones, but also being lonely and alone is a huge threat for a baby. And that will set their amygdala off. they will have their hypothalamus working. So their stress hormone gets released in their brain and body. Those two brain areas are still developing and actually highly shaped by nurture, but they work. They work really well. But what babies totally lack, and this I think is the biggest thing that people need to know, they totally lack the off switches to turn off stress. And this is like the biggest myth out there. Babies can self-soothe. They can go from a state of high stress to low stress alone, right? They're fine. They're safe. Like they might not know it, but they're safe. Like leave them alone. It's absolutely not true. They cannot lower their stress themselves. Their hippocampus is still offline for the most part, and the prefrontal cortex is as well. And so what they need to actually lower their stress is us. They need mom or dad or a caregiver to interact with them in a responsive way, an authentic, gentle, responsive, emotionally and physically close way to release oxytocin into their body. So they actually lower their stress curve through oxytocin. And so they need to feel safe, warm, loved, held. They want to smell you. They want to feel you. They probably want to feed and to be close quite a bit in order to turn their stress off. Big, big difference.
This makes so much sense to me on two levels. One, just thinking of evolution, that quite literally, if a baby was kind of left in the wild before we had locked spaces, that would be an extreme threat to survival. And so that we've developed in that way in order to survive. And the other area that it makes so much sense was in my body as a mother. I was not prepared for the level of stress I would feel when my baby was crying. It was the most natural thing in the world for me, and still is when he's crying, to comfort him and to soothe him. It's so intuitive. And I was and do receive a lot of messaging that he needs to learn to self-soothe. There's something that I hear a lot from society. And because I know the brain chemistry, both from reading your book and my background studying neuroscience in college, I know logically that's not true. And then I also know how horrible it feels for me to just, and I never have let him cry because it does feel so horrible. So that shows me that there's some sort of wisdom, because I do follow the wisdom of my body. That was one of the
Yeah.
biggest things I took from your book, was that just soothe my child when he's crying. Pick him up, hold him, sing to him, look into his eyes, rub his back. As a toddler, I'm not creating a monster. I'm literally regulating with him. As an infant, I'm soothing him naturally because he's actually scared. And so it just took this pressure off, because our society in general in the Western world so independently oriented, that we're trying to create independence in our infants before they're ready, because they don't have the prefrontal cortex yet developed. And as you say often in your work, they need to borrow our brains. So that always comes into my mind. He has to borrow my brain. He has to borrow my brain.
Absolutely. I think
Yeah.
that disconnecting mothers from that intuition and knowing is probably one of the most like destructive, violent thing that's ever happened in human history. It's just heartbreaking.
Yes. And it almost, how it would affect too as an adult, just thinking it, you almost have to numb
Yes.
to get through those moments. Both the baby and the mother almost has to figure out how to adapt to that lack of contact. And I think that shows up in our systems and adults in a variety of ways. Will
Definitely.
you speak to co-regulation?
Yeah, for sure. I think to finish the stress conversation too, why is co-regulation so important for the stress system, right? To bring that stress curve down. People will say, well, what happens then if you don't? What happens to the baby, right? And so, touching on your kind of evolutionary standpoint on it is what's evolutionary advantageous for an abandoned baby is to shut down, dissociate, freeze, and go to sleep,
Mhm.
right? So babies are entering sleep through a stress state versus a safety state, right? Versus a safety state for like where the stress curve's gently being lowered down quickly, effectively, and in a way that's going to shape the system. They're going to go into some of those dissociative, frozen, and/or sleep states, right? Depending if it's during the day or at night. And we see this a lot. Babies will have different survival mechanisms to cope with being left alone with stress, whether during the day or during naps and bedtime. And so co-regulation really is so important. In one of my doula trainings, one of the exercises was kind of great. They just like had baby dolls and they just passed them around and they're like, everyone do something different to help this crying baby. And so, the first person like, put the baby on their chest and started swaying. The next person rubbed their back. Someone else sang to them. It's like, what would you do, just intuitively for a baby who was upset, right? All a multi-sensory experience is what really helps babies. That movement, the singing, the closeness, the smell, the touch, just taking you in with every sense that they have is what is going to bring them back. And we are scolded for doing this, so shockingly. We're like, do the bare minimum. Like, just use your voice or just pat their back or rock their crib, something like babies hate, like it stresses them out to have one sense stimulated at a time. It actually makes their stress higher. So just go for it. Like do the whole thing. What did your mother do or grandmother do or aunt or teacher or someone that, you've seen do something beautifully with a baby, right? Like that really natural kind of responsiveness is what they love. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I want to touch on these key developmental periods because I know that from 0 to 3 and then adolescence, and what just blew my mind, I read your book and I've never heard this before, is that in matrescence and putrescence, when you become a new parent, that certain circuitry opens up. And I think of this in terms of co-regulation because if my baby was upset or needed help, I felt my system out of regulation and I would pick him up and we co-regulated. And as a new mother, and still as a new mother, I can feel, I know this is wild, but like literally different neurochemistry. Like I'm rewiring my brain through that
Yeah.
experience. So maybe touching on these key developmental periods and talking about the opportunity for healing as adults within them.
Yeah, I'm so happy you said it that way because what I just said seems so easy. Like you're going to be calm and regulated. It's going to be so easy to like just pick up your baby and sing to them and move, right? It's so much more accessible for us to know that we have the brains that were shaped by our infancy. We all have different genetics and experience that interacts to form our stress systems and our nervous systems. And so often during that co-regulation, we're treating ourselves and our baby at the same time, right? We're regulating both of us, but we're in the lead, of course. And we have that prefrontal cortex that can work and think and use tools and think about the future and all these things. Impulse control, right? Often the things we do, the moving, the singing, the rhythmicity is equally soothing us and helping us regulate while we've got our baby there with us, right? Very, very often. And we could go off on another place now, but let's talk about what you raised. Yeah. We really have this incredible opportunity to start. You sound like you could feel it in the moment. Have you felt that growth in your own regulation and everything? Yeah.
So much. In society, I think as women, we get a lot of messages about the physical changes of pregnancy we'll receive, like structurally. I was not prepared for the hormones and the brain chemistry changes. And my area of interest, my study, my passion, all is body based. So I do a lot of practices to get into my body. I'm hyper attuned to it. And I just feel like everything was wide open and my past traumas were there. Everything was just there. And I have a lot of resource. I have a lot of support built in. I have a lot of tools. I have all the tools in the world. And it was really challenging for me, but I leaned into nurture and I allowed that nurture to really heal my past, rifts or traumas, repair. And now, coming up to this 2-year mark, I feel like a new version of myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear this from so many mothers and that was my experience too. It's like the years 0 to 3, I'm on the other side. My son's 6.5 now. And so I can look back on it in a really clear way now too. I make it sound like it's beautiful and amazing, and it really is. But we are really going under like through this really, really intense transformation. And, I usually talk about it like the transformation of a caterpillar to chrysalis to a butterfly, where we're kind of a caterpillar before having a baby. From 0 to 3, for many of us, we're in the chrysalis form and we're goo. We've like, the chrysalis is that we have decomposed, like exactly what you
Yes.
said. We have decomposed into
Goo.
all of our parts. Maybe we
Yeah.
can see our parts again. Depending on how aware we are, we can understand that when my baby cries, my infant experience is being triggered because I was told to shush or I was yelled at or isolated. that's really coming up many, many times a day. That is a very emotionally exhausting experience. And to have to regulate yourself, regulate your child, on and on and on, right? Like seemingly
Yes.
without end. And the sleep and the relationships. Like there's also these amazing highs, right? Where I used to both feel some, big feelings, rage, sadness, frustration when my son would be activated and frustrated and stressed. Sometimes, depending on like my state, and then sometimes I would look at it as like, this is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen, that you are just letting it out. You can just be so upset right now and you have no filters and you are just letting it out. Because I had a lot, like even at a young age, I was filtering myself and my emotions. It wasn't safe for me to do it. And so it's amazing, right? It's so much. But we are this goo, like we are goo. And it's good to know that. It's good to know that it's like emotionally so hard, because that is the experience. And then if you, like you said, leaning into nurture, you know the answer. You're like, okay, this is so hard right now. Maybe you might think, oh, what am I going to do? But then if you just remember, like, return to nurture, this is always the answer. You will get to that. You'll move through for yourself and your baby. And over, I don't know how many thousand repetitions of going through that process, like several thousand, you are rewired. You absolutely are rewired. It's a double process going on. The first is in matrescence, when we become mothers, and also putrescence, when people become fathers. We get new access to remodel our stress systems that were formed in infancy. So our amygdala, our hypothalamus, our prefrontal cortex, a new part called the insula, which is like theory of mind and empathy kind of area of our brain. These are all really, really malleable during the early parenthood. And we've got that advantage. It's kind of a triple threat, right? We have the motivation to deal with our stuff, because sometimes before having a baby, we do the coping mechanisms, right? We're getting high, shopping, drinking, partying, running away, right? Or like exercising, right? There's all different things we can do, working too much as our own coping mechanism. But when we have a baby, we're motivated to be there for our baby and to be parenting, and also maybe to have some of that change and healthy motivation. And then we're presented with practice after practice after practice, like an unbelievable practice, right? It's not once a day, right? When you learn to meditate, you're like, the meditation I did, it was like 20-minute sits a day. Like, whoa, that felt like a lot. But when you have a child, you are being invited into some kind of brain changing practice at least at once an hour, if not multiple times. Right. And so you've
Yeah.
got all of this happening. People leave when they do lean into nurture, they leave feeling healed, transformed, like they've had those butterfly wings and they can just fly afterwards in this really beautiful way. Yeah.
It's bringing up this story for me of this morning, actually. I think really clearly in the morning. And so I wanted to wake up and refresh for this conversation with you, just kind of refresh on your work, have a cup of coffee. I set my alarm for 5 a.m. and I love waking up at that hour when I want to think clearly. I go downstairs, I'm brushing my teeth. Who gets up at the same time as me?
Every single time. Every single
So,
time. Because your brains are
hi, honey.
connected.
Yep, and we still co-sleep bed share, so we're really connected in that way. Sometimes he'll sleep in, so I was taking a risk, but he comes down and he sits on the couch with me, and he does this thing now where he likes to interlace both of his hands with both of my hands.
Cute.
So here I am on the couch, hands tied up, and just my little one just doesn't want to go play, nothing. He just wants to sit on mama's lap. I thought this is so perfect, preparing for this conversation, that he's coming down and sitting here looking me in the eye and just wants full presence from me. And that's an example of this unbelievable practice, that here I have stuff to do. I have things, very tangible things to prepare for. And yet I have my son. And this is a dance that I continue to learn in these early years and probably will do for the rest of my life. But it's been the biggest adjustment. And rather than kind of get him off of me, force him to play, shut him in a room, I sat with him and eventually I said, honey, I need at least one of my hands to write some questions, because I was really creative.
Yeah.
And I said, Mom has to do a little bit of work. You can sit here, I'm with you. And so I started typing with one hand, and it was a negotiation, right? And if I didn't have the immediacy of the conversation, then I probably would have just shut my laptop. But this is an example, I think, of how nurture can be, it's a dance. It's not always 100%. It's not always perfect. It's a way of being. I looked up the definition. It's to supply with nourishment, to
Beautiful.
supply with nourishment. And I want to move into nurturing because it is so powerful. We've been talking about it a little bit. You say spoil your baby is your kind of counter to the culture that says don't spoil your baby. I wonder if we could come up with some examples of what spoiling the baby looks like
Yeah.
that are actually really high nurturing.
Yeah, absolutely. The first one I always say to new parents, no matter how close they are to me or not, like including members of my family, was be prepared to hold your baby nearly 24 hours a day when they're born. And every time I get phone calls like, we can't put the baby down. We can't put the baby down. I'm like, you have to hold your baby all the time. People can spend like a few $1,000s on devices to try to stop this need for
Hmm.
babies, right? It's like, do we, does that sound natural? That we need 6 machines and swaddles and pacifiers and noise machines to stop that biological drive of a baby to be close and the parents to be close. So that's a big one, right? Babies need a lot of holding, a lot for months and months and months. And so you don't have to get those gadgets. I do think people should get a baby carrier for sure, like a really good baby carrier. If there's 2 parents, one that fits both parents, or they have their own that fits them really well, because there's a lot of nuance to fitting in these things. And so, yeah, that's such a big one, right? Babies just, they want to be close, they need to be close, they grow better close, like everything good happens when babies are close. Then another huge one is learning their communication and cues, which kind of goes hand in hand with that. When you are close, you're really going to start to be able to see that your baby can talk and communicate to you minutes after they're born. No one quite gets it. Like, I will get a baby into my arms and just start having a conversation, and everyone in the room's like, whoa, what is she doing? Look at this. And I'm like, we can all talk to babies. Everyone can talk to babies. You just have to, get on their level and communicate with them. They can speak to us very, very, very openly and beautifully, which is really important, right? And that's not what we typically see very much. We sort of
Hmm.
see people managing their babies more than being with them, in real ways. The communication goes along with both just having those conversations, but also feeding them whenever they are queuing for it, feeding on cue. People are starving babies and controlling their food. This is heartbreaking to me. Sleep is being managed in a really scary way, both for like the emotional well-being of a baby, but also their brains really need sleep to grow. That's when the brain grows to the most part. And so using babies' cues to offer them their naps and offer them their bedtimes, essential to spoil our babies. That might be like, oh, you're letting the baby be in charge. Like, they're tired when they're tired, they're hungry when they're hungry. That's our job, to support them with those things. And then I think maybe the stress is the last big one to highlight, right? Also responding to their cues to borrow your brain to regulate their stress. It's not to have conditions on it. That's a big one. There's a new baby in my circle now, and someone in their family said to the mom, she saw them responding to the baby's cries, and she said, "Oh, you better not do that." She's like, "You're setting yourself up for like a life of hell if you're responding to that baby so much."
Hmm.
First of all, I'm like, what's the alternative to just have a screaming baby all the time? And secondly, this mom's response was, I am here for my baby. This is my job right now. Like, this is my job. And I know that my baby's going to need me for these years, and we're going to move past it, which absolutely happens for everyone. So yeah, being prompt, very prompt to respond to your baby's distress, I would say, is another major pillar, spoiling your
Yes.
baby.
The fears that I hear that come up around all of these, and I love all of them, is that I'm trying to think, I'm hearing the echoes in my head right now. That you're going to get the tail wagging the horse,
Mm-hmm.
or you're going to create a monster of a toddler, or he'll be sleeping in your bed with you until he's 13. These are all things that I hear in response to sensitive, empathic nurturing and
Yeah.
high levels of care. So let's just touch on toddler tantrums, perhaps, because you're saying infancy, brain wise, is from 0 to 3.
Mhm.
So when we say baby, we're not just talking about 0 to 1, we're talking about 0 to 3. And so tantrums, what's actually happening in the brain and nervous systems during these moments?
Mm.
And why is nurture so important?
Yeah, so important. So yeah, there's a different way to respond to stress where the baby's, generally under 18 months, like they start having tantrums somewhere around there. Again, like nothing's prescriptive. Your
Yeah.
10-month-old could have tantrums. That's okay. Does it? No problem. But generally, the tantrums start to come in the second half of infancy for many. And the way we respond can be different because it's a slightly different emotional experience for our little ones. So at the younger ages, distress, it's more of an immediate need of distress or sadness that they just really need to be kind of swooped up and co-regulated the way that we first talked about. For an older baby, there's more emotion there, right? They might experience anger and frustration first at the first part of the tantrum. And that's often when we will see their fight or flight response come on. And this is called bad behavior that we have to punish or reward away. And so our fight stress response is we might see biting, kicking, punching, just erratic movements and behavior. We might see a flight response, which is running away. My son used to spin in circles or run around our kitchen island in circles, run away from the table, or a freeze response, which is the most misunderstood, I would say, where they'll kind of shut down. They might just be staring, things like that, or lying down. And so, yes, not listening, shut down, right? There's those kinds of things that are also bad behavior. And so in those moments, they really need us to be there as well, regulating or regulated. So we're either regulated if we're kind of in a good place that moment, or we're in the process of doing that too in our own way. And to tell them, I see, like, I'm wondering if you're like really angry right now, naming some of those emotions that they're feeling. I'm right here. I'm right here for you. Whenever you need me, I'm here. And so they can kind of go through it. We can limit what they can do, right? We can also kind of help them not hurt themselves or others when they're angry. We can say, you're punching me. I see you're punching me. I'm wondering if you're angry. You might be needing to punch, like, let's punch this pillow or punch this stuffed animal or push the wall or go for a run. And I can't let you hurt me, right? So if they're really so far out of control, you stop them from hurting people. And then they kind of move through that to more of that sadness again. And then that's the point where they will sort of say, yeah, I do want you. I want a hug, and to co-regulate that way too. And so if they have done some kind of behavior that we don't like, if they have hit, if they have, thrown something at someone, traditional discipline would punish them for that, right? To say, okay, go by yourself, be by yourself for a while. But if we really want to teach how to have feelings and manage our behavior in a way that doesn't hurt ourselves or others, which is what I recommend, we can use those moments to teach. And so once they move through the anger, they move through the sadness, they're regulated again. Maybe they need some water, maybe they need a snack, let's see what their basic needs are. Let's get them back to baseline. Then we can talk about it and sort of use, I call nurtured empathy. It's in the literature, it's called reflective functioning, to really link it all together for them, to sort of say, okay, you hit me really hard, or you threw your toy across the room really hard. I'm guessing that you were really frustrated and angry in that moment. And, you needed to move. We did that. And let's think of another way that wouldn't hurt somebody next time when you have that feeling, because we're all going to feel angry in our lives. And so maybe next time, what do you want to do? And you can give them some choices. Like, next time you're feeling angry, do you want to punch the air? Do you want to jump up and down? Do you want to skip around? Do you want to scream? Something like that, like scream into a pillow, something. And then, like, little by little, that will get wired in. Again, the same way that we need all those thousands of repetitions to change our kind of immediate responses, so do our little ones too. And that's another thing, another kind of practice that would probably be called spoiling a child. Yes.
As you're describing this, what I'm hearing and bringing it back to the brain science is, as a parent, we are activating that prefrontal cortex, the space right underneath the forehead. And amidst the tantrum, the baby's literally borrowing our brain. So we're holding space. And it can be a really heavy lift depending on how active our nervous system is as adults to do this. It takes a lot of mindfulness, a lot of presence, a lot of emotional energy, but it's holding a container and saying and really seeing the greater context of it. And in this nurturing container, they are getting the nurture bath after with the co-regulation, correct?
Yeah.
So that nurture bath of oxytocin, I think you said serotonin, different hormones, neurotransmitters that are bathing the brain to wire their amygdala in the sensitive time to be able to be less reactive in the future.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that true?
And
Okay.
also stimulating that prefrontal cortex to grow these inhibitory connections to the amygdala so that they can better control their emotional responses later on,
Yes.
too. Yeah. And one of the big things with spoiling is people are like, well, when can I just leave them alone? When can they self regulate? When can they self soothe? When can they just deal with their own stress? And I always say, I actually wish that on nobody in the world. That is a very unhealthy way to be dealing with stress. We are a social species. We are made to always be interdependent. We are made to always co regulate. Of course, we need some regulation skills, right? Of
Mhm.
course, we do. And we get those through this style of parenting in early life. But if we're ever feeling big feelings as a mom or dad or any type of adult, self-regulation only gets us so far. We also need relationships and trusted people that we can go to with our feelings and get that social support too. That's another really important thing. So we want to teach our kids that too. Yeah.
Yes. You mentioned baby wearing, holding your baby 100% of the time. And then as we're talking about this presence with babies crying and during tantrums, what if a parent's just touched out?
Yeah.
So I love touch. And one of my favorite parts about being a mother is cuddling with my little guy. And I'm surprised. Sometimes I feel myself, I just need space. At this point, he follows me into the bathroom, oftentimes, or he waits outside. Like
Mhm.
he's always around, and I love it.
100%.
But what would you say to parents who are feeling overwhelmed with the heavy lifting of the emotional ask of being so present, both physically and energetically with their
Yeah.
children?
I really burnt out because I did just go full on with this nearly by myself. And so I look back, and that is my biggest wish to myself when I was going through that time, was to firstly have way more tools for real nervous system regulation, for real resets that are not scrolling on my phone, mainly scrolling on my phone, or watching TV or things like that. So I would want parents to firstly, I have a retreat every year that kind of gives parents a whole menu of all of these things that firstly, you need to take a break. I think that's the first thing to say. Moms, primary caregivers, you need to take breaks. And so that's my first wish, is that we have, as a primary caregiver, at least 1 hour of the day that is for our own freedom, that we can move the way we want, we can replenish ourselves in a real way, it's a big ask. It's a big ask because honestly, I also say for someone who's parenting alone, nearly impossible. But for families with two parents, a lot of the families I work with have two parents, it's still not enough. Two people is still not enough for a baby. We almost need three people in a household when we have a baby. And so it's hard. It's a tall order, but I will say use whatever resources you possibly can to have what we call some allo parents around. You certainly want to have two parents or a parent with a strong support person in their life, another family member, a friend, or hired person if possible. But can we get a third in too? Right? Because usually both parents are working at full capacity. But at minimum, that primary parent or mother is having time to themselves as much as possible. I say an hour a day. If that's impossible, a couple hours a week. If that's impossible, at least 1 hour a week to look forward to. It's really worth saving up money for this. People spend an unbelievable amount of money on their wedding, tens of thousands of dollars, and don't save a penny for this time. I did. I had a huge fund for myself, and I did have a nanny come in a few hours every week. But my mistake was that I worked during every single one of those hours where I had help. And so if I went back, I would assign myself at least an hour of that time or add on an hour of my time of that time so that I could have my own care. It's really hard for us to leave our babies when they're little, but knowing that when we do take that time to truly replenish ourselves, we're also taking care of our baby. It's really important, right? So we just hopefully avoid that burnout. And then if we do burn out and if we are finding ourselves getting frustrated and touched out and things like that, again, making a plan to schedule some R&R, some true R&R for yourself. It's really important.
One of the things that's been huge for me is a local gym has childcare.
Great.
And I've noticed that my son connects with a couple of the providers there. So I try to go when they're working. And lately, he's always been crying when I leave, which is so hard for me to walk away when he's crying for me. But I know that if I can get an hour in the gym, either to do strength training, which I love doing, I listen to a podcast, I get my own energy. I lift weights, I feel my strength. I might go into the eucalyptus steam room. I might just take a shower and put on makeup. I might sit in the massage chair, whatever it is, that has been integral for me. But there's still a part of me that feels guilty for leaving him in there. But I know that when I pick him up, I'll be more refreshed and
Yeah.
present. So I just want to name that when we say all the time, there's breaks in all the time
Yes,
too.
of
Yeah.
course, of course. I
Yeah.
mean, all the time is more newborn is like the early phase,
Yeah.
right?
Okay. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would say there is nothing, I mean, we do feel that guilt often. There is absolutely nothing wrong with having childcare. And it's important for our little ones to feel safe and connected to the people who are taking care of them. So that's great that you see that. But yeah, I see nannies, caregivers, places like your gym is what's replacing the village that we don't have, replacing the close community that we don't have. They are our baby's community. They love these people that take care of them, and they take care of them beautifully. In Los Angeles, there were so many businesses that had that kind of setup when I lived there. That was amazing. They had like a co-working space like that. They had a spa like that. They had, yeah, there was everything. So that is a really good option for people.
And such a gift. So I know we're coming up to the hour, but I do want to end with this question of what if someone's listening to this and they have children that are past this 3-year-old mark and they parented with more of a low nurture style? What does repair look like for that person? And also, what if an adult's listening to this and reflecting on their childhood and realizing that they weren't nurtured as babies themselves? What
Yeah.
does repair look like for that person?
Yeah, such a good question. And it is important, like repair is possible, healing is possible. There's a multi-zillion dollar industry of healing that is helping so many people, right? We work with this circuitry that's formed from 0 to 3. So I never take away the importance of what happens of 0 to 3. It's important. It was always going to be part of you. But there is also a lot of rewiring that the brain can do that interacts with these parts, right, in really important ways. So for the parents who are listening who have a child who they did their best. Every single parent did their best. So like again, everyone does. I've never met any parent on earth that is not making every choice for the best interest of their child, right? We know so much more now. And so if there was lower amounts of nurture, some of these practices we talked about from 0 to 3, anytime you open up your heart to them and you open this relationship with your child, it's going to have a huge healing effect with them. Huge. So I didn't answer this question before, but we do have these 3 periods of neuroplasticity in our emotional system where it's really high. So the first is 0 to 3 years. The second is adolescence, about 9 to 14 years old. And the third is when we become parents, or if we actually spend a lot of time around babies, which is kind of interesting. So like a doula, a nanny, anyone who's just with a baby a lot, taking in the senses of a baby, they're going to get that neuroplasticity too. So if you have a child, you can read my book. You can adapt almost all of it to an older child. You can make them feel safe in sleep again. You can make them feel safe with their emotions again. You can make them feel safe in relationship with you, and it will have an effect. So the biggest study on this is on orphans who were essentially completely emotionally neglected as babies. So a very extreme version of low nurture, the most extreme. They were fed and clothed and left in individual cribs. So these babies, when they were nurtured through their childhood, so they were adopted after 3 years, 2 or 3 years, when they went to really highly nurturing families during childhood, they did experience a lot of mental health issues, behavioral issues, and cognitive issues during their childhood. But those parents stayed nurturing the whole time. And then when they became adolescents and entered that newer plasticity time, hugely benefited from the nurture. A lot of their risk factors for mental health, physical health, social, cognition, all of it, they almost disappeared because that nurture was acting on their brain throughout childhood. This new plasticity opened up, rewired, and then they were generally okay after compared to other orphans who had low nurture during their childhood. They had a lot of significant difficulties in their childhood and adolescence and adulthood growing up. So we know it has a huge effect in childhood. And even if your child's an adult, it can have a huge effect, right? I've seen like some of my adult clients have given my book to their parents, the grandparents of their babies. Those parents kind of went through something, went through a bit of a journey, and started telling their adult children that they love them for the first time and started getting interested in their emotions, interested in their experience in the world for the first time. And that was tremendously healing for these adult children, right? So that's important for people who are not parents. Was that the question? If they are not parents and are kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
discovering it? Yeah.
And don't plan on becoming parents, so they won't have this matrescence
Yep.
opening window.
Yeah.
How would you guide them?
Yeah. So I would say there's a lot of therapy, a lot of therapeutic modalities that can look at this directly. And so find one that feels good. Find a therapist, firstly, like the relationship with your therapist is the number one predictor of any kind of healing or change. You have to connect with them. It's relational healing. Therapy is relational healing. If you don't relate to your therapist, find another therapist. So there's a lot that will focus on early life stuff, a lot of different modalities. And so go on a journey there and look, yeah, yeah, those root causes.
Well, thank you. This work, it just feels like the core of everything, to be honest. I offer nervous system care to high achievers, to folks who, are wanting to avoid burnout. So I do a lot of
Beautiful.
work in the nervous system realm. When I learned this, I'm like, this is the foundation. This is the start. This is the core. And so to have you on this channel, on this podcast, it's so aligned in so many ways. And
Amazing.
your work has changed my life. And I hope that this conversation can ripple into the world and influence others. Where can people find you? And are you offering anything you want to share about?
Sure. Yes. People can find me on Instagram, Dr. Greer Kirschenbaum. My website's linked there as well. My podcast, I have a podcast people can look at too. I have a professional certification that it's running right now, but the next group will be available later, and that will teach people how to work with infant and family sleep in a nurturing way, help optimize sleep for families and their babies, and also to lead pregnancy circles for pregnant moms and mom and baby circles for people postpartum too. So that's my newest thing that I'm very excited about. And I have a parent program in the works too. So people can get on that wait list on my website as well.
Incredible. I had so many more questions I wanted to ask you, but thank you for your wisdom. Thank you so much. And yeah, I just wish you the best in everything that you do.
Thank you so much. It was so nice to be here.